Hello everyone and welcome back to the Arthur Cox Resilience video series. My name is Denise Murray. I'm the Head of Financial Services, Compliance and Regulatory Relations here at Arthur Cox. In our last video we explored how you can document and map the interconnectedness and interdependencies that underpin your critical services. Today we're going to go a little bit further and we're going to explore what happens when things go wrong. The shift to digital service delivery has fundamentally changed how firms build and manage their resilience frameworks, but it's also changed the nature of the dependencies that firms face. In this session, I'm joined by my colleague Ian Duffy, partner in our Technology and Innovation Group, and together we're going to walk through how a firm might identify, respond to, and learn from an ICT-related incident. So Ian, to get us started, could you walk us through some of the most common ways that firms typically identify or become aware of an ICT incident?
Yeah, thanks, Denise. Yeah, sure. So look, there are multiple different ways in which clients can identify incidents or become aware of them. And how that happens will, to a certain extent, depend on the nature of the incident and, to be honest, the structure of the client to a certain extent as well. So, for example, some incidents may originate as a result of a compromise in your supply chain. And in that type of scenario, it's pretty common for clients to become aware of it because they get notified by their relevant service provider. Conversely, it may be that an incident arises as a result of some sort of human error. So you could have a staff member clicking on a phishing email, for example. And in that type of scenario, you may become aware of it because it's self-reported. The relevant staff member will let you know. Or it may be through your own monitoring of your systems. You actually see that type of incident occurred. Another scenario, and perhaps the most dreaded of them all, is a cyber attack. So that's where a hacker effectively unlawfully accesses your ICT systems, they encrypt your data, and they issue a ransom demand for the decryption key. And it's common in those type of scenarios for clients really only to become aware of the incident once they actually receive the ransom demand from the hacker. So there's a few different scenarios in terms of how an incident can occur, how a client can become aware of it, and the type of incident that can actually affect clients as well. So there is a fair bit of variety there in terms of the nature of the incident. And I guess in that vein, it's also worth mentioning under legislation like DORA, the concept of an ICT-related incident is actually defined pretty broadly. So under DORA, it's any incident that compromises the security of ICT systems and adversely impacts the integrity, the confidentiality, the security of services or data. And from clients' perspective, it's important to ensure that your staff do actually have an understanding as to, well, what actually constitutes an ICT-related incident, because doing so will help them not only from the perspective of being able to effectively identify these incidents and to mitigate their impact and effectively respond, but also in terms of actually being able to prevent certain types of incidents actually occurring in the first place.
So knowing how the incident might come to light, when we have had an incident, it's been identified, what should we be thinking about or what should firms be thinking about in those first few moments, especially in terms of activating the response plans and engaging with the right people, because we know it's not just about assessing the damage.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, when a large-scale ICT incident does happen, I think in the first instance, it's very much the case that clients should actually see at that point in time the value of the time and effort that they've invested into developing their structures, their controls around operational resilience, the ability to effectively respond to incidents, and really that effective response to a large-scale disruptive event is to a large degree focused on the effective deployment of a number of key policies and procedures. So that'll be things like your incident response plan, your crisis communication plan, your business continuity plan. And once you've actually deployed those different policies and procedures, it's really important that key staff members understand what their role is in respect to them. Because to be candid, it's not really enough just to write certain roles into a policy and assume that people will know what to do when the big incident does actually occur in practice. Really what you want to do is ensure that those policies and procedures are battle tested, right? So that can be through things like tabletop exercises, other types of review and training, so that when the big ICT incident does actually happen, people understand this is what's expected of me, this is my role, this is how as an organization we're going to effectively respond and deal with this incident. Another significant consideration when it comes to responding to ICT-related incidents is obviously regulatory reporting. So from a DORA perspective, this will be focused on trying to establish really whether the incident satisfies the criteria and the thresholds to constitute a major ICT-related incident under DORA, which is reportable to the central bank. And in simple terms, an ICT-related incident will be a major incident under DORA where it affects your critical services and it constitutes a successful malicious attack on your ICT systems that creates a risk of data loss, or it satisfies two of the other materiality thresholds prescribed by DORA. And they relate to things like, the number of clients affected, the number of transactions affected, duration of the incident, geographical spread, publicity, etc. And if those materiality thresholds are satisfied, you will have to report the incident to the central bank on a staggered basis. So the first phase of that will be an initial report, which needs to be made within 24 hours of the incident actually being identified, or within 4 hours of it being classified as major, if that doesn't happen within the first 24 hours. After that, you'll then have to submit an intermediate report, and the idea there is to provide a bit more information in relation to the incident to the central bank, and that has to happen within 72 hours of the initial report. And then thirdly, there's a final report. And that has to issue within 1 month of the incident, and that will include more substantive detail on the incident. So it will be things like, information on the root cause analysis that's being conducted, details of the costs associated with the incident, ultimately how the incident was resolved as well. And in addition to those DORA regulatory reporting considerations, it'll also be necessary to think about, well, do we actually need to report this incident under any other regimes? And an obvious question to ask there is this incident a personal data breach that needs to be reported to the DPC pursuant to the GDPR? One helpful other point just to note when it comes to incident reporting is that if you are dealing with an ICT-related incident that affects payment-related data or payment-related services of, for example, a bank or an e-money institution, and you determine that it's a major ICT-related incident that needs to be reported under DORA, helpfully that incident doesn't also need to be reported under PSD2. So that's good because there isn't duplicative reporting obligations in that scenario.
So lots of reporting, regulatory reporting, lots of consideration of the regulations, but there's other practicalities as well, right, Ian? So maybe could you talk to us briefly about what they might look like?
Yeah, look, that's absolutely the case, Denise, that look, after you've deployed the policies and procedures like we discussed and you've thought about those regulatory considerations, there is multiple other practical steps that you need to think about when you're dealing with a large-scale ICT-related instance. So, for example, you'll need to centralize your facts and come up with a single version of the truth. You can use those facts and that information to then notify the board in relation to the incident and provide them with regular updates in relation to it as well. Also really key to reach out to your key external service providers at an early stage. So think about your provider of cyber insurance, also IT forensics, external counsel. In addition, if the incident occurred or originated in your supply chain as a result of an act or something affecting one of your key ICT service providers, really important to establish a clear line of communication with them at the earliest stage possible, so you get the information you need from them, you get relevant updates and regular updates so as to help you effectively respond to the incident. And look, I think it's probably implicit in all of what I've said there that really a key aspect of that effective response and taking those practical steps is ensuring that there is those clear lines of communication, both internally amongst key relevant staff and then upwards towards management and the board, but also outside the organization to those key service providers. And having that effective and clear line of communication to relevant parties will help in terms of your effective response, dealing with relevant regulatory reporting requirements and other relevant regulatory considerations.
So we've had our incident.
Yeah.
It's clear that things are moving fast. We're communicating and reporting really well.
Yeah.
There's a surge of activity, so teams are mobilized, systems are being assessed, there's a response team put in place. I think probably though helpful just to reflect that it's not just about that kind of reactive response.
Absolutely.
When we're in that environment. I think what comes to mind for me in particular, Ian, is that you have to capture what you're doing as you're moving along. So that requirement to document what happened before, during and after your disruption is just as important as those communication channels.
Absolutely.
it's important maybe to spotlight that for a moment and maybe just pause on this particular point, because it can be really, really difficult after the event to go back and document and remember what you knew at points in time that informed your decisions, that drove you through the process in what typically is quite a fast-moving, kind of pacey environment. But nonetheless, the expectation is there that you will document and that you will have a good record, not just of your communications, but of how you managed during the process day to day. And look, we always hope for a quick fix for issues, but unfortunately that's not often the reality. From experience, the scale of the effort that goes into managing the aftermath can be a little bit underestimated, whether that's kind of restoring the service or addressing the vulnerabilities and improving and enhancing arrangements and kind of adapting to a new norm. What often sets firms apart, and you've mentioned this already, is that communication through the process, transparency being key, making sure stakeholders are managed and informed within the business through the board. Because it's not just about technical recovery. From my experience, it's really about information, reassurance and engagement with your key stakeholders. And you've mentioned that, Ian, and that might be your board, it could be your regulators, external parties, but they need to know that you're in control and that you're aware of their concerns, that they're being addressed, and particularly, I think, in financial service context. But interestingly, I think one of the really good examples we have recently is Marks and Spencer's. So the CEO in that instance used social media, which let's be frank, is probably their most effective communication channel in good times, but they used that to keep their stakeholders up to date during their disruption. And maybe a really good example to kind of reflect on in terms of proactive engagement and evidencing that leadership to build trust and retain confidence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, when you do get to the end of an instance, and you're getting towards back towards BAU, and the incident is resolved, obviously there's going to be a sigh of relief from all involved, because these things are pretty intense. But to sort of pick up on a thread you mentioned there, Denise, that's not really the end of the road from a regulatory compliance perspective, and there is multiple things that the affected firm needs to think about to ensure that they do see the journey through from a regulatory compliance perspective. And one of those will be that final report to the CBI that we talked about in relation to the incident from a DORA perspective. So, providing that information around the root cause analysis, providing information on how the incident was resolved, etc. There's also requirements we need to be alive to under the CBI operational resilience guidance as well. There is that expectation once you get to the end of the incident and it's resolved and you're looking back, that you carry out a lessons learned session to figure out effectively, what happened, and how can we perhaps adapt in ways that help us to ensure that this doesn't happen again, or if it does happen again, that we can respond more effectively. And as part of that, you should develop a set of sort of predetermined questions that you ask yourself in that type of scenario. So that will be things like, how did this incident actually occur? What vulnerabilities did it expose? How did it impact our critical services? How quickly and effectively did we respond and recover from this incident? And once you've done those final few steps, I guess the final thing you want to think about is any sort of remedial actions you're going to take off the back of that, right? And any remedial actions you are due to take, ultimately you'll want to make sure that they're logged and that they're monitored by senior management and the board, so that there is that sort of continuous improvement of your operational resilience profile. And I guess if the incident did originate in your supply chain, which is a concept we've touched on a couple of times, you may need to think about, well, look, do we need to revisit our contract with the service provider? Do we need additional protections, controls, processes to try and help ensure that this doesn't happen again through our supply chain, or that if it does, we're better able and better prepared to respond to it? And of course, look, when you get to the end of an incident, you also have to think about, well, how effective were all of our policies and procedures that we used in response to them? We have them on the shelf, they're written down, they look great, but now they've actually been used in the real world and properly road tested, and were they effective, or do they need to be adjusted and slightly adapted? So if something like this does happen again in the future, we have an even more effective process that we can roll out to help us respond to it.
And that neatly takes us back to the starting line, with policies and procedures that have been battle tested and that are ready to be deployed the next time an incident occurs. And with that, we've come to the end of this video series today. And we've really explored what you do when you identify an incident and how you respond, and most importantly, how you learn from it. Our Resilience Playbook can provide you with some more information and is a useful resource as you are exploring your resilience frameworks and your resilience response. If you have any questions, please do reach out to us, to your usual Arthur Cox contact. Alternatively, you can send us an email at resilience@arthurcox.com, or you can find more information on our website at arthurcox.com/resilience. Thank you very much, and see you next time.